Welcome to Common Mansplaining, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Just wanted to share this one with you. It's going to be a quick one. I came across this gem from Peter Zeihan. For those of you guys who don't know Peter Zeihan, he is a geopolitical analyst. So as we watch this, understand that's his wheelhouse. He's not really an American political analyst, so his research on American politics isn't quite as high as it is in the geopolitical world, but he's asked a question by one of his Patreon subscribers asking why the Democrats keep losing, basically. And so he gives his answer to the best of his ability. Now, I'm going to do a little correctional work and clean some of it up, but we're going to talk about what he says because a lot of what he says has a lot of truth in it. So let's check this out.
Hey all, Peter Zeihan here, coming to you from Colorado. Today we're taking a question from the Patreon page, and it's about U.S. politics. So specifically, the question is there a future for the Democratic Party in the United States? And the short version is probably not. Just to review, the Democratic Party is not what it used to be. It has been through several iterations since it was formed back in the 1800s. But in its most recent iteration, one that dates roughly back to the post-World War II environment, the party basically...
So this is one of the first places where I think he kind of makes a misspeak. The most recent iteration of the Democrat Party is actually a response to Trump, right? Trump kind of transformed American politics from, Republican conservative, liberal Democrat to Republican populist, liberal anti-populist, right? So that kind of made that polar shift. But even before that, I would say that the most recent iteration of Democrats comes about around in the 1960s, late 1960s, early 1970s. After the Civil Rights Movement, they kind of gradually shifted. Now, one of the classic political conversations that you'll probably overhear if you've argued with anybody ever about, the civil rights is a lot of times somebody on the right will sling an accusation at the left. They'll say, we're the party of Abraham Lincoln, we're the party of anti-slavery, we're the party of civil rights. We supported civil rights more than the Democrats did. And insofar as it goes, that's technically accurate. But then you'll hear the response from the Democrats, and they'll say, after that, the parties flip-flopped, right? And so that's not exactly accurate. It's actually kind of a dishonest way of looking at it. What actually happened was both parties went in new directions, right? And both parties kind of took advantage of some demographics that the other party had at one point in time had under their sway, just because some of the regional divisions kind of split things up. Now, that isn't that all Republicans, adopted all of the stances of the Democrat and that all Democrats adopted the stances of Republicans. It's not what happened, right? So it wasn't like one party here, whoop, it was not just like an even switch, right? So what actually happened was the Democrats decided to move in the direction of targeting urban zones, minorities, and the coastal elites, right? So like the ivory tower types. And the Republicans ended up trying to target the South, which was known as the Southern strategy, right? Pick up a lot of the disgruntled Democrats who had fought against civil rights when Democrats moved in that direction, right? So the Republicans tried to scoop that group up, focused on the rural populations and the religious populations, right? And so, it isn't like an easy flip-flop. That's like a classic misnomer.
It's formed around three big pillars of voters. The first is organized labor, with capital being on the Republican side of the equation.
So that's another mistake, I believe. I've done a lot of research into this, and it is not accurate to say that the Republican side is the rich side. Actually, it is the opposite. Democrats almost always outraise and outfund for elections. Now, they do it in a sneakier fashion, right? George Soros was a genius, albeit an evil genius, right? In that he had this huge NGO type scam. So whereas Republicans do a lot of donating directly to candidates, the Democrats do this trick where they often funnel it through these indirect sources. So they call it dark money, right? So they'll put it into super PACs and NGOs and charities and local grassroots movements that are still run by the PACs and by the charities and the NGOs, right? And so it might look like it's dispersed, but and that it's not going directly to these candidates, but it is, right? And so that's why if you look at like the amount of money that goes into each candidate election, Democrats almost always outspend Republicans.
The second are ethnic minorities, with most white people edging towards the Republicans again. And then the third group is coastal elites, specifically of the white tower crowd, people who live in cities and have a very different way of looking at the world than, say, rural voters who are more likely to be Republicans.
Very good.
Those three categories are the bulk of the system. And if you look at it just on the numbers, if you add up all racial minorities in the United States with all organized labor or blue-collar workers, with everyone who's living in the cities, it's a super majority of the population. It's pushing 70% of the total. It should, by the numbers, not only be the dominant party, but it should be the only party in the United States. And yet, they keep losing elections by ever more impressive margins. Why? Well, a couple things to keep in mind. Number one, politics evolve. Yeah. Remember, this isn't the first form the Democrats have been in. I believe this is the fourth. And to think that it is static for all times is silly. Second, politics evolve in terms of the issues. Technology pushes people on different sides of the win-loss ledger. Economic transformation can make some states or urban centers rise while others fall. Changes in technology change how we interact with the world. And all of these things have happened at scale in the last 35 years. I mean, just think about what we've been through since 1985. We had the nuclear scare of the Cold War, then the collapse of the Cold War, then the rise of China. We've had the baby boomers being the predominant factor in American politics as they were entering their adult years, and now they're all retiring, changing the financial and the budgetary shape of the entire country.
So yeah, just so you guys can see it, obviously, this is his wheelhouse, right? Geopolitics and, like demographics and stuff. This is where he's a master.
We've had the onset of the digital revolution and the rise of social media, changing how we all interact with one another. Of course, we're going to manage our politics differently. But for the Democrats, this has not been a gift. Three basic things have combined to make it non-functional in its current form. First, those liberal, coastally educated, urban living elites. They're not nearly as united as you might think, and more importantly, they have a hard time resonating their ideas with the rank and file of the United States.
Thank you.
Most Americans do not own six figures. Most Americans have not graduated from graduate programs. And so the sort of tunnel vision that you can get if you're a part of this coastal elite just doesn't really carry out to others. And when you see people starting to protest for trans rights, that just doesn't resonate for most of the country.
Yeah, so, I mean, I wouldn't just say trans rights in general, but what he's talking about is absolutely correct. Like, you get this kind of tunnel vision when you're an elite and when you're, like, educated with a doctorate's degree. A lot of the time, when inundated with the academia, like ideologies, you have these very specific lenses that you put over your eyes when you're viewing politics, kind of like beer goggles, but for politics, right? And like one of these, for example, is Marxism, right? And we've seen several variants of that, like feminism, like critical race theory, like, the trans ideology. A lot of these Marxist movements are very, very hyper-specific with that lens. But the problem is, once you put a lens over something, like you take a red-colored lens over something, everything in the world's going to look red, right? And you're going to miss everything that isn't red, right? So that's the problem with these Marxist lenses. You might understand this one hyper-specific zone very, very well, but the moment it comes time to like turn it into practical application, stuff that everyone can get behind, stuff that everybody will understand and it will resonate with them, it just doesn't work anymore because you were way too hyper-specific. So that's one of the major problems with the Democrat Party.
The second issue is racial. One thing that defines your average American is race. White, black, Caucasian, Hispanic, Asian, yes, Native American, Islander, mix, however you want to call it. And it has been an important aspect of American identity, but it's not the only one. And it often finds itself clashing with other aspects of identity. Your education level, your region, where you're from, how you define your sense of self, whether you're gay or straight. All of these things muddle together along with economic issues to give us all our sense of self.
Yeah, and the other thing that I don't know if he mentions this or not, but a lot of the time now, the different ideology brackets, like these identity politic brackets, like race, gender, sex, etc., they start to clash with each other, right? As far as, like, for example, you've seen a lot of the tensions with the trans movement against women, right? So, like, these are two different identity minority politic ideologies, and yet you see them fighting with each other over spaces, right? For example, trans women in sports, or trans women in women's bathrooms, or trans women in prisons, or stuff like that. So, like, you see them start to clash directly with each other, right? It used to be the feminist movement held sway over all of the women's rights issues. Now the trans movement is coming in and trying to eat some of that space away, and so they run into trouble.
And one of the huge mistakes the Democratic Party has made over the last 30 years is to simply bet that because birth rates were higher under Hispanics than they were under whites, that the country was going to become more and more and more leftist, more and more democratic.
I've always said that was a huge mistake. I have always, as a matter of fact, and this is, by the way, guys, this is why I really hate Trump's rhetoric with regard to immigration, because I feel like he could have the exact same policies and sell it with a much softer tone, because I think Hispanics on average are a very conservative group. They're very Catholic. They're very, like, traditional. They're very hardworking. They end up in the working class. They end up in blue collar jobs. If Donald Trump had just, like, reached out to that group, then he could have, like, brought them in with welcoming arms. As it is, he's still got 55% of the men, but he could have had, 55% of the women. He could have had the entire, identity group in his bucket if he had just, I think, if he had just tread a little bit lighter, not, just generalized every immigrant as, a killer or a rapist. I think he could have done much, much better. But that's just my personal opinion. But yeah, like the Hispanic group, I think the Democrats also made the mistake of assuming that it's like, as long as we just keep churning immigrants in, we'll have all these extra, voters for Democrats because they're all a minority, right? Like, we'll just keep on bringing people of color in. That's not how it works, unfortunately, because actually, believe it or not, without the aspect of the goal of trying to bring the rest of your family over with you, if after you've gotten past that point, their ideologies just don't match. They don't mesh well with the Democrat Party. They're very conservative on average.
And that is simply one measure. Instead, we saw two things happening with specifically the Hispanic population. Number one, they became steadily and more wealthy, which tends to put them over into the Republican camp. And
See, again, he keeps on mentioning wealthy equals Republican. I don't think that that's what this means in this case either, because the Hispanics, by and large, as they come in and they're getting their feet underneath them and they're very hardworking, they're not, like, getting wealthy. They're not turning into, like, billionaires. But what they are doing is turning into, like, middle and upper middle class, right? Which is, again, where you would start to worry about your paychecks and the amount of taxes that come out.
Second, Hispanics, especially first and second generation Mexican Americans, are very strong in blue collar work, specifically the trades like electricity and welding and similar items, construction, think. Well, the United States is going through an industrial renaissance where those skill sets are massively in demand. And so if you want to look at politics through the lens of the economic haves and have-nots, the Hispanics have become more and more in the category of the have moving forward. So for them, tax rates have become as important, if not more for most, than things like racial equality. And so more and more of these people have shifted over in the general direction of Trump-style Republicans. And the third issue is cultural. If you're a first or second generation Mexican American, a first or second generation immigrant from any background, odds are that where you came from is less organized than the United States and less wealthy. You came to pursue the American dream, which means you have some firsthand experience in your family of what a system with weak rule of law looks like.
Yep.
One of the great things that we have forgotten in this country is that most migrants have a deeper degree of religiosity than most Americans.
Yep.
And so when you get a Mexican immigrant or Nigerian immigrant and they come to the United States, they are far more likely to be socially conservative
Yep.
than, say, the social liberals of the coasts. So we have all of these things happening at the same time, changing our idea of identity, and the net result is a lot of factions that used to be core to the Democratic coalition are now toss-ups. Hispanics were as likely to vote for Trump as they were likely to vote for Harris. Same for people under age 30. The youth are now in play as well.
Yeah. There's something else that was going on, too, in the Democrat factioning, and that was that back in the day, I think, as I recall, maybe 30, 40 years ago, Democrats did a much better job of being kind of open-minded, and they had like a much greater range in their Overton window, right? In their list of things that were acceptable for Democrats to believe. Now it is tightened substantially, right? Like it has gotten to the point where it's almost like to be a Democrat, you have to like check a series of boxes off. And if you miss even one box, then they will take you from what is effectively is a center-left leaning person and thrust you into what they call like far-right or alt-right. For example, that's what happened to Jordan Peterson, who is essentially center-left. That's what happened to Elon Musk, who was center-left. That's what happened to Tim Pool, who was center-left. That's what happened to Joe Rogan, who was center-left. That's what happened to RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, Matt Taibbi. Like, I can go on and on and on. And like all these people, Mike Schellenberger, they were all essentially classical liberals. They were all essentially classic Democrats, but then they missed like a single box and everybody's like, oh, that's a conservative, right? Like if you asked right now, if you went and polled 1,000 Democrats, like, is Joe Rogan a Democrat like you guys? Is he liberal like you guys? Most of them would probably say no, simply because of his endorsement of Trump. When in reality, Joe is left-leaning on like 85% of the issues. Like if you go really dig into his positions, he's left-leaning. He's a center-left, center at the most, but mostly center-left in my opinion. So, like, that's the thing. You drive people away when your Overton window shrinks to just, like, this narrow little sliver of people. And Donald Trump, coming in with a new kind of populist movement, was ready to scoop up the backlash. He was ready to be like, you know what? If they kicked you out, we'll take you in, And so that's part of the problem.
You pull this all together, and at the moment, it is absolutely impossible for the Democrats to win any big election unless there's something else very big in play. Does this mean that the Democrats are dead forever? Not quite what I'm saying. What I'm saying is they can no longer count on winning by the numbers. There has to be another issue out there that motivates, and the general unpopularity of Donald Trump is something that the Democrats today are counting on. But as we learned in our last federal elections, that is not enough.
So, yeah, absolutely. That's, I couldn't have said it better myself there at the end. And, part of the problem was that the Democrats really were depending on this, like, anti-Trump philosophy to get them over the finish line. They're like, look at us. We're not Trump. Therefore, you should vote for us. But the problem is they didn't make a positive case for themselves, right? They're like, yeah, Trump is Hitler and blah, 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 blah. And so, of course, you don't want to vote for Hitler, do you? But then the problem was when the time came for the Democrats to put forward their own stances, their own concepts, their own ideology, their own direction, their vision, they had someone like Kamala Harris out there who could only say like 6 rehearsed lines. And if she did anything other than that, it was just a disaster, a PR nightmare. And those lines weren't convincing. They just didn't resonate with people. A lot of the stances that the Democrats started championing are like these 80-20 stances against, right? Like most people wanted stronger immigration enforcement. And then the Democrats are like come along and they're like, we'll take the 20% side. We don't want immigration enforcement. We want open borders. And then most people wanted women to have their own spaces. And the Democrats come along and like, we'll take the 20% side. And I'm like, that was just not a winning strategy. And then the best part, and this is the best part, right? After all is said and done, and we do the like election autopsy, the Democrats are like, I don't understand how we lost. It must have been racism. It must have been misogyny. That's the only thing that could have happened. They didn't once analyze their policies to see if it was actually their policies that were just deeply unpopular. Guys, that's all I had for you today. Catch you next time. Common Mansplaining.